You may be seated, everybody. Thanks, Phil. Okay. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And good to see so many of you here, and good to see so many of you guys on Zoom. We can actually see you on Zoom in the back now. That's a new development here. So those of you who have video on, anyway, we can see you. So today we're in the middle of the summer before we move into the High Holy Day season coming up. Really begins next week. We're in Elul already, so we're kind of prepping our heart already. But I still wanted to sort of keep this a little light, and we're still recovering from camp. We're recovering from camp. That's just because we stayed up late every single night and got up early you guys know, right? We got some campers here. And it was just a terrific experience. But I wanted to continue with a theme that we talked about last week. So last week, we picked up on some of the themes that we were talking about at camp, over our camp curriculum, because I always love to bring what we do at camp to you guys, because we don't like water material down for the teens. We do real stuff, and it's on our minds, and it's in the air, so it's like, let's just share this together. So last week we spoke about the importance of having a daily established prayer time, first thing in the morning that you give your first to God, and how critical that is that you spend time with Him for a mature and fulfilling relationship with the Lord. That's also what He's asked of us and called us. We talked about how important it is that it's our job description. It's part of our DNA. There's communal prayer. There's personal, private prayer. We unpack that. That message will be up on the website soon. Today, what I want to do is just give you, unpack a couple of passages that have been very meaningful to me in my prayer journey, and give you guys a sense of a little activity that you can do in your personal prayer time that I found to be very meaningful. And we shared this with our campers at camp, and I think it's meaningful to them as well. So that'll be the goal. If you do have a little thing to write or something, if you'd like to, you don't have to, but you can at the end of what we're going to do. But first, let's get some Bibles. Let's open up some passages and talk a little bit about this, and then we'll do a short exercise. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be looking at a passage in Philippians, one of my favorite passages. Cheryl's too. I can see that. And in James. Let's see, could I ask someone to grab some Bibles from back there just so that you can have them? I don't have slides today. Marta has got some Bibles there. So we are in Philippians 4, verses 4, 5, etc. Rejoice in the Lord always. Do you guys have it? Okay. This is such an important passage. I've talked about this passage before, so if there's anything repetitive, forgive me, but it's in different contexts. There's just so much we can do with this passage, and it speaks to so many different areas of life's problems. But this will lead us into a prayer time, okay? So we're in the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all people. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the shalom of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Messiah Yeshua. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any virtue, if there is anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. Put these things into practice, and the God of shalom will be with you. Isn't that a stunning passage? It's so interesting. So do not be anxious. Do not be anxious. I don't think that Paul is like giving us a rebuke here that says, you don't be anxious. It's a commandment. I think it's more that he's saying that you don't need to be anxious about all of these things, because instead of being anxious, you can bring all of your requests and your circumstances and your needs to God. Why? Because when we do, He will then give us His gift of peace. That's the whole idea. So it's not saying don't be anxious. It's saying here's a tool to help you not be anxious. Here's a tool to help you get through the challenging circumstances that you have in your life. The peace will guard your heart, your mind from worry and anxiety in Messiah Yeshua. And further, if you dwell on the presence of God, this is where this passage goes in the end. If you dwell on the presence of God, If you dwell on things that are just and pure and lovely and noble and good, then this peace will rest on you. Now, when we do this exercise that we're going to do in the end here at camp, we've done this a few years in a row, and so many of our campers will feel that they hear from God during this time. And so I'll ask, what did you guys hear? And so often, it's like there's so many times that I can't even just highlight one specific one. When someone will say something like, well, I don't know that I really heard from God, but I just felt this amazing peace come over me. And it's really interesting because it's kind of like, well, the Lord just spoke to you. He just gave you his peace. And that's what this passage is all about. Don't ever underestimate the power of God's peace in your life. People live their lives without any peace. And you can have the peace of the Lord inside of you, just even in a moment of stillness. So there are qualifiers, 3 qualifiers that Paul writes about. He says it's not just that peace will come over you. You have to pray, there's petition, there's thanksgiving. There are things that we have to do as part of the process. So prayer. Let's break this down. And I'm being a bit arbitrary. We could break this into different categories and understand it differently. But for our purposes today, prayer. Let's call prayer bringing the situation to him with expectation that he will speak to us about it, that he'll give us insight, that he'll give us wisdom, that he'll give us direction and peace. So this involves listening. It involves listening. Then there's petition. He wants us to ask him for very specific needs, desires, with an expectation that he'll respond and act in some way. He can affect the situation. He can make a difference. And last week we talked about how if God is really God and he can change the world, he created you and created your everything, it's not taking our situations to him and asking him for things is insanity in some way. If he really is who he says he is, and he hears us, and he desires to answer our prayers. And lastly, thanksgiving. And it all comes together. It's kind of like a big ball with all these different parts. Thanksgiving. When we bring every request before God, we can be grateful because we know that he will act. We thank him. He guides us. He brings peace that will guard us and protect us. And so we can give him thanksgiving even before we've experienced an answer that we understand, because we're trusting that he will answer us. We're not saying that, this thing that hasn't come to pass has already come to pass and we're thanking him for it. That's not what I'm saying. But we're grateful for his work in our lives. We're grateful for what he's doing in our lives, even in the midst of our trial. And then this last part, dwell on these things, I think is about trust. We then demonstrate our trust by dwelling on things that are true, lovely, honorable, worthy of praise. So we say, the Lord's got this. I don't need to worry about it anymore. Worrying is like rehashing. It means like thinking about it again and again and again and again, reliving the circumstances and then the what ifs that then go all in these other different directions and playing out circumstances that haven't even happened yet. So when we stop that and we move over, I like to say jump tracks to another track. We're over here, we're dwelling on things that are noble. We're not rethinking our problems because we're trusting that God's got this, and it demonstrates trust. So now let's look at this same idea. I'm just touching on this lightly here today. Let's look at the same idea in the book of Yaakov, the book of James. So James, if you could flip over to James chapter 1, just a few over. James chapter 1. I'll tie these two together. You guys there? James chapter 1. This is another beautiful passage that during hard times you want to pay attention to, or decisions that you need to make. Go to James 1. Actually, we're going to begin at James verse 2, this whole section. Consider it all joy, my brethren, my brothers and sisters. Consider it all joy when you encounter various trials. Okay. This is already like a wow. Consider it joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect work so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God who gives to all without hesitation and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, without doubting. For the one who doubts is like the wave of a sea blown and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways. Okay, Let's do like an interpretive paraphrase of James 1. Consider it joy when you go through trials and hard times because God is using it to make you more spiritually mature. So consider it joy even if it's hard because he's working in you towards a greater good through this process. Whatever it is, there's nothing that's too great a process for this passage to be working in your life. Now, when you focus on what God is doing in your life behind the scenes, rather than the hardship itself, there's something in the midst of the trial that will bring you joy. That's the key. God isn't the one causing the hardship. It's not like he's doing this thing to you or giving you this trial because he doesn't like you, or he's not giving someone cancer because he wants to make them more spiritually mature. That isn't the way it works. But he will work within the trial that's happening in the broken world that we live in. He will work within that trial to make you more spiritually mature and to understand the things that he's going to do within it and behind it. So he's not causing the hardship, but he can use it for good in your life if you allow him to. But Yaakov realizes in this passage that we face a problem. If you're like me, you don't really know what God is doing during a hard time because we're so focused on how hard that time is. Like I was talking with Raina as we were kind of reviewing this, and I was, it's like convicting, and it's like, well, wait a minute. In the moment of the hard time, this doesn't apply because what I'm in is so much bigger than this. It feels like that. But no, that isn't the case. That isn't the case. So we need to step out. He says in verse 5, if you lack wisdom, and we can interpret it this way, if you don't understand what God is doing through a particular struggle, if we don't know, this is so difficult, Lord. I don't know what you're doing. I don't understand it. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I don't know which way to go. If you don't understand, what do? We ask. If you lack wisdom, ask. And then he'll answer. And assume he'll answer you because he loves to answer those who he asks. Then he has this little qualifier. But when you ask, you must trust and not doubt. Ask in faith. Otherwise, you'll be like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. You'll be unstable. You'll overthink everything, and you won't be able to hear an answer from the Lord. Have any of you guys felt that way? And I'm speaking to those of you who have experience kind of listening to God and whatnot. When you kind of like, is it yes? Is it no? Is it yes? Is it no? Yes, no? And you go back and forth, and you can't really tell, and you don't know what you're hearing from the Lord is from you or from this person or from this or that, and you get so muddled, you just need to stop. You really just need to stop. And what's going on is you're being tossed in the wind, back and forth and blown around. And so he says, when you need to ask in faith. Do not doubt. Do not go back and forth and question all of these things. It doesn't mean you don't have mentors and people in your life and you don't ask for clarity and more signs and wait. It doesn't mean that. But whenever you get so muddled, that you just feel like you can't hear, it means you need to step back. You need a lot of stillness. You need silence. You probably need to rest. You probably need to sleep. You need to have some more space, and you need to come back and ask the Lord again at a different time. And I'll tell you, this is something I struggle with. I'm an overthinker. I can just like mull and overthink and this and that, and blah, 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 blah. And Raina is a real help here. She kind of brings me down. She's like, you need to pray about this right now. Get on your knees and pray about this right now. Or she'll say, what is God telling you about this particular thing that I'm talking about? And so she's very helpful in that regard. So joy in hard times, joy in hard circumstances, which, comes from focusing on what God is up to over the trying circumstance. That's the key. It's quite simple, although it's difficult. Joy in hard times comes from focusing on what God is doing over the trying circumstances. And if you want to know what God is up to, you ask. But when you ask in faith and trust that you will receive an answer, and that even if the answer isn't what you would like or think, it will help and it will take you and it's the right answer. So in this passage, in addition to confirming, I think this ties it with Philippians, there are 4 keys to asking in faith that I want to bring out. Asking in faith means this. First, it's trusting that God is speaking to you and he wants you to hear him. Trusting that God is speaking to you and he wants you to hear him. Second, that God has equipped you with the ability to hear from him. That you can. You're not deficient in this area. He's equipped you. 3, the faith act, the faith action is to ask God and expect that he'll ordinarily answer you. So if your expectation is hearing from God, and that's the norm, that will be more of your experience. In the opposite way. The more you expect, the more you see, the more you see, the more you expect. The less you expect, the less you're going to hear, because it doesn't demonstrate that kind of trust on the Lord. And you won't ask, and you'll be doubting, and you'll be blown around by the wind, and you won't hear anything. That's what James says. And number 4, God is doing a good work in you, whether you seem to hear from him or not. And that's where you trust at the end of the day. That's where you jump tracks from your worry and anxiety, and you dwell on things that are noble. And that's when you open yourself up to be able to hear from him anyway, because you're showing this trust that he's got this over here. You don't need to dwell on it anymore, because he's going to answer you, and he's going to give you guidance and move you forwards. What Yaakov is getting at is that learning to hear from God requires a firm foundation where the work that God is doing becomes more important than the circumstances you're in daily life. And that's an inner heart orientation that we change when we change our heart, and that's when things start to change. So Yaakov, they're just giving us very practical advice. If you get so caught up in your circumstances and emotions that you won't pause to see what God is doing, then what's going to happen is you'll ask all the wrong questions. And then you won't get an answer. So instead of saying to God, I'll just give a silly example. Why is this person being so aggravating? Why can't you change them? That's something people might say. I can't believe I'm in this situation. You might say, what are you doing in me through this person? Or what are you doing in me through this trial? It's a very different question. So prayer in faith here requires that we trust God in our circumstances, that he's actually working things out for good in our lives for those who love him, Romans 8, even if you can't see it. And then if we trust God in our circumstances, what happens is he then is able to trust us with more revelation. You see? He needs to know that if he tells us a little bit over here, we're going to go to him and trust him that he's going to explain that over here. We're not going to take it in some wacky, crazy direction, or it's not going to hurt us in some other way. So he'll give us insights into problems and things like that because he can trust that we'll be able to manage it and handle it because we have this dynamic relationship with him. He knows that tomorrow morning you're going to be back there again talking with him about this, if not earlier. So the key here is to cultivate more and more trust so that you become less and less dependent on your circumstances and the outcomes of your circumstances around you. And this is not another you should. That's not the whole point. It's not another obligation to put on you. I don't know anyone out here who does this perfectly. If you do, talk to me. But that's pretty amazing. I think what Yaakov is getting at is that this is a path that we can come back to. You don't have to be so anxious because there's another way. Doesn't mean you're going to do that way all the time, but you can come back to it. It's here. It's in the scriptures. Come back to it. You can dwell on things that are lovely over here. You don't have to stay over here. So trust and faith are not like an all or nothing thing. They're more like a continuum. The more we trust, or the less we trust. You see, it's like all back. And I'm all over, I'm walking like this and this. I'm all over this spectrum in my life. It's like, and if you realize that, you're getting caught up and you really haven't spent much time with the Lord lately, just start spending time with him. You just change. You just go back, you see? And he's right there. So I don't know how this works. I think it's sort of like spiritual laws of physics. Trusting more creates a space for God to do more and more in your life. Yeshua says this amazing passage. He says, the faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains, right? A tiny mustard seed is loaded with growth and multiplies and multiplies and multiplies. So I don't think he means that just a little faith is all you need to move a mountain. I don't know if that's really what he's getting at. I think what he means is that just a tiny seed of faith, if we actualize it and if we nurture it, then it will grow exponentially. It will become more and more powerful in our lives. It will grow a field. We don't need to be spiritual superheroes to hear from God. We just need enough faith to step out and try. That's the mustard seed faith, to step out and try. So the more we trust God with our trials and circumstances, the more we rely on God for what's going on around us. You see? And the more we rely on God for our happiness, the more we realize that we need him for our happiness. And the more we need him, the more time we spend with him. And the more time we spend with him, the more we'll come to him and ask him about our concerns and about our issues. And the more we ask him, the more we'll learn to wait and listen for his response. And then the more we listen, the more we hear from God. And hearing from God will change your life. You begin to find out that the truth about how God sees you and the truth about how you see yourself may be different, and you try to sync those up. And then almost by accident, it's really by accident, you find that you just aren't worrying so much about a decision, Or even in your journal, I have a little journal, you say, I'm going to pray about this decision tomorrow. And you've got 10, 15 minutes, you're going to sit and talk with the Lord about this particular issue tomorrow, or maybe longer, maybe more, because you have these deeper roots, and he'll give you the peace of Messiah that surpasses all things. So let me close with this recap of these points, and then we'll go into our exercise briefly. First, go to God. This is the whole thing. Go to God. God desires that we go to him with our circumstances, concerns, and worries, needs, and wants. I'm saying it again and again and again because I know that in the moment you don't want to do that, He wants to ask us to ask him for things. That's prayer, petition, thanksgiving. The faith action here is that we take these things to God, demonstrating that we're willing to trust him with our circumstances. Second, listen with expectation. Listen with expectation. God desires to speak to you. He's equipped you with the ability to hear from him. He desires that you hear from him. Ask God the expectation that he'll ordinarily respond. That's the idea. Giving us insight, direction, peace. The faith action is that we take the time. You have to take the time to be still and listen. And 3, jump tracks. Dwell on God's work. Trust that God is doing a work in you regardless of the circumstances, whether or not you seem to hear from him. And then gradually begin to live more and more out of the work that God is doing in your life rather than your circumstances. So what we're going to do now is take a very short kind of thing. And this is something I love to do, especially when I get anxious or this or that. I come out here. I use a stopwatch on my own. We have a prayer bench outside. And, sometimes I'll combine this. I'll daven first and then do this afterwards or switch it around. But it's a real great way to really bring all of these things to the Lord. So we're just going to do this with a stopwatch. We'll do it in a short way. So we're going to take a minute. And in this minute, I'll lead us in a prayer, and we'll just be in stillness during this minute. I don't really want you to pray. I don't really want you to try to do anything except just be quiet and still. And what so often happens, at least in my experience, is that my stillness will be interrupted by a list of onslaught of things that come to me within about, 0.02 seconds, okay? And the thing is, a lot of times those things are things that God just wants me to pray about. They're not distractions sometimes. Sometimes they're the things that I'm most worried about, the things that I'm most anxious about. Those are the things that he wants me to pray about. So what I want you to do is in this stillness time, just observe and see kind of like what comes up. Maybe nothing, and that's fine. But if something comes up, if you have a piece of paper or something, or just you can memorize it, just write it down, what those things are. Just a little name of whatever it is. This decision you're making, or this particular thing, or that, this person in your life, this situation. And then let it be for the minute. And then we're going to target some of those things in the next part of this, okay? So, Lord, we just ask you during this time that you would help us to find you in stillness. And if there are things that are weighing on our hearts today that you would like to speak to us about, that you would just bring those up. And that we wouldn't see them as distractions, but we'd see them as kind of like you generating our prayer list. So I'll give you 1 minute. Okay. So that was a minute. Did that seem like a long time or a short time for you? Short. Yeah, short, a minute of stillness. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. How many of you guys felt like you kind of got some worry things that kind of popped into your mind? Had any things that sort of like a few things on the list? A few of you guys? Okay. So that's great. And this could be, you could take 5 minutes in stillness and do this, and you'll get a whole laundry list of things. And he might start talking to you about it. You might move, might not be quite so structured. Now what I want to do is take another minute. And during this time, I want you to take the first thing on your list, if you wrote one down, or the first thing that came up for you. If nothing really came up for you, that's okay. Just think about something that you do want to pray about, something that is on your heart, weighing on you right now. Maybe a decision that you have to make, or a situation that you're in, or a fear that you have, or a worry, or a circumstance, something that you're anxious about. And what we're going to do, just a minute, and we're just going to lift this. It's like you just lift it up in your hand, almost metaphorically. And I don't want you to pray about it. I don't want you to talk to God about it during this minute. Just listen. Stillness. Just let him speak to you. It's an opportunity. If there's anything that he wants to speak to you about this particular thing, this is that time. Okay? So don't try to pray. Just clear your mind as much as you can. Just listen. Pay attention to any images that come up, any words that you hear, any sensations that you have, any emotions that you have. This is the way that he speaks to us through the Holy Spirit. So Lord, we just ask you to come right now and to speak to us about these particular issues. We know that you can speak to our hearts, to everyone in this room. You can speak all at the same time. Okay. And that's a minute. So let me just ask for kind of rate. Anyone feel like you might have gotten a sense about something from God during that time? Yeah? Anybody? Yeah? Would anyone like to share? Just a quick, we don't have a lot of time, but just one thing. Anyone like to share an experience? I know some of you not back there. What's that? Oh, Cheryl? Oh, okay, Cheryl too, yeah. Go ahead, Cheryl. Yeah. I'll just repeat it.
Not be afraid of something that's really on the forefront of my mind.
Yeah.
And that he's aware and not to be afraid.
Yeah, not to be, I'll just repeat what you said into the microphone. Cheryl just said she just had a sense of not being afraid, you know. And I think that's really critical. Think about it. 1 minute, right, and you have this sense about don't being afraid about it. So I would say, you know, is it biblical? Yes, it is, right? That's all over the scriptures. Does it have a sense of the way that God speaks to us? This is another message, but yes, it does, you know. Is it risky? No, it's a good thing. Do it. So take it. Write it in your journal, and this is something you can hold on to. You know, really, it really is, and go back to again. So, okay, we could go around the room and have other people share, but let's just do one for now. That would be great. Thank you. So let's just take 1 more minute. I have another activity that I want to do, that's why. Let's take another minute, and what I want to do now is take that same topic on there, and we're going to actively pray about that same topic. So before we took a minute and we listened, now take a minute and talk with God about it. Ask him for what you feel like you need in this. Ask him to work things out. Ask him what he's doing in you. Ask him to make changes in your life, to bring these things about. And so you're talking with him about it. Okay? All right, I'll give you another minute. Ready, set, go. Okay, cool. Now, let me just ask this question again, kind of a show of hands. I'd like to see, how many of you felt like on that particular issue that you had, there's some further resolution? You just feel something a little bit more connected on it? You know? Yeah, a number of you guys. A number of hands here. And that was, 2 minutes? I mean, that's remarkable, 2 minutes. You don't have to go in this structure. You can pray first. You can listen afterwards. You can do it for 5 minutes. You can do this. I do find that actually pulling out a stopwatch for me, this is my own thing, really helps to like structure it. Otherwise, I just get zoned off and start thinking about other stuff. So it's helpful to bring things back. So I want to offer this to you as an opportunity and something to do to take all things, take your anxieties and worries and concerns and the things of your life intentionally to God in prayer, where you can listen and you can actively pray about it and you can hear from him about the circumstances in your life. So to conclude, we have go to God, prayer, petition, thanksgiving, listen with expectation, and dwell on God's work. Dwell on things that are pure, true, lovely, noble. And with that, a Shabbat Shalom to you all. And I'll invite Phil to come up and we'll close our service today.